Good morning. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral here in San Francisco, California. Welcome to the last forum of the spring season. In all the many conversations about climate change, sometimes the story of the value of nature to us can get a bit lost. We have a lot to learn from the kinds of traditions that see nature as relatives, not resources, as communities, not commodities. We need a narrative that places us back within the natural world as actors in this multi-million-year drama. If we're able to do that, if we can put ourselves into that drama, then we can see that we have a role to play in a thriving future, not just for people, but for the entire biosphere, for all life on Earth. And there's perhaps no better place to start than urban settings like San Francisco. Dr. Scott Sampson is the executive director of the California Academy of Sciences, where he leads the institution's world-class museum, as well as its programs of scientific research, sustainability, and education. A renowned paleontologist, passionate science communicator, and seasoned museum leader, Sampson may be best known, especially to preschoolers and their parents, as Dr. Scott, the Paleontologist, the on-air host for the Emmy-nominated PBS KIDS television series Dinosaur Train. He's the author of multiple books for general audiences, including Dinosaur Odyssey, Fossil Threads in the Web of Life, How to Raise a Wild Child, and You Can Be a Paleontologist. Today, we're going to be talking about falling in love with nature and Scott's mission to regenerate the natural world and help it to become wilder each year. Scott, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Malcolm. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, indeed. I know this is kind of a silly question, but what are your favorite kinds of habitats, animals, plants? You know, what do you, when I say, what do you love? What kind of first occurs to you?
Wow. Favorite kinds of habitats? That's not a question that I'm asked very often. I
love redwood trees.
Yeah.
I love the Central Valley, the oak woodlands.
So I too love redwood trees. That's definitely one of my favorite habitats. I grew up in Vancouver, British Columbia by the ocean. So I have both the ocean and the mountains that are near and dear to me. But then there's places like, as a dinosaur paleontologist, you go places where it's mostly desert. There's not much vegetation because that's where the fossils are. They're places that people call badlands, and they're bad for farming and agriculture, but they're really good for fossils. So remote places in Kenya and South Africa and Mexico and Argentina.
Madagascar.
And some of those places are very near and dear to me too, because I've spent a lot of time there, and they've shifted the way I look at the world.
Yeah, how about particular animals?
Orcas, for sure. Growing up in British Columbia, and orcas are pretty severely threatened. I've developed a particular fondness for grizzlies, so there you go, grizzlies and orcas, big carnivores. I don't know what that says about me. And then birds. Yeah, and people forget that dinosaurs aren't extinct. There's still more kinds of dinosaurs alive today than there are mammals, and we call them birds. All birds are the direct descendants of dinosaurs and therefore dinosaurs themselves. And so by studying birds, I'm actually looking at modern day dinosaurs. So that tickles me too.
I love that. I love pelicans. Just the way
Absolutely,
they fly.
Yeah. My wife Tony is here, and Tony and I have owned a home in Muir Beach for a long time. And we just love this time of year, actually, when there's lots of pelicans around. They're just magnificent to watch, especially diving into the water to catch fish.
Yeah, and you know, that's one of the things that's really improved in my life. When I was a boy, there were many fewer pelicans. It was kind of like the post.
Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, from the 1970s to now, it's a noticeable difference.
And that's so interesting because that's the reverse of the trend that we've seen almost globally with animals. Yeah. Like there's a frightening statistic that most people don't know is that between 1970 and now, the populations of wild animals, from insects to mammals, have dropped in size on average by about 2/3.
Yeah.
So that means actually 70%. So 2/3 of the animals that were around in 1970 are no longer here. Yeah. And as evidence of that, I remember going camping as a kid, and at the end of a day driving in the mountains or the forest or whatever, the windshield of our Volkswagen van with the pop-up top would be covered with insects.
Yeah.
And now that doesn't happen. Your windshield can be almost clean at the end of the day. So we have far fewer animals, but there have been some animals that have made comebacks, and pelicans.
Yeah. Well, crows in the city are
oh my
doing
gosh,
amazing.
crows are, yeah, very successful.
Yeah, very, very successful. You know, part of the reason you're such a compelling scientific communicator, it has to do with your own memories of just your childhood in natural settings. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just memories that you have of nature when you were a child.
In the book that I wrote about this topic, I start the book with a story that was foundational in my life. I was 4, maybe 5 years old. It was that spring. And it's, I think, my earliest memory. And my mother, who was really responsible for my passion for nature in many ways, took me to a frog pond that was literally about a 20-minute walk from our house. It's in the forest. And we walked to this pond, and it was a Vancouver, British Columbia spring day, so it's damp and there's rain or water dripping from the trees. And we got to the frog pond, and she told me that we had to go because there were tadpoles there, and I'd never seen tadpoles. So we walked up to the edge of the pond, and I looked in, and my little 4-year-old self, and I couldn't see any. And I looked at her, and she said, well, get closer. And so I got closer, and I still didn't see any, and then I thought I saw something, and I had those big rubber boots on that all kids wore back then, and I stepped into the water, and all these tadpoles scattered, and I thought, oh my God. And I stepped in further and further, and there was tadpoles everywhere, and then one of my boots flooded. And I looked back at my mom, and she kind of went, okay. So I just kept going in the water until the water was almost up to my chest. And I don't think many moms would be okay with that today, but my mom was. And my memory is of this incredible experience of awe, where there was no separation between me and that place and all those tadpoles and that pond. It was this sense of vastness, this sense that I belonged. And it was experiences like that that really inspired me to pursue a career, actually now more than one career, around nature and the focus on nature. So those experiences can be really powerful and even guide your life.
Yeah. Reading that book, I mean, Jade, your daughter, is just such a partner in your adventures. And I wonder if you can talk just a little bit about, I mean, that was a long time ago that you wrote the book, How to Raise a Wild Child, and now she's grown up. You know, what effect do you think those experiences have had on her, you know, now that she's getting older?
It's a great question. And as a parent, as I'm sure most or all of you know, the last thing you want to do is try and push your kids into something, because the odds are they'll go the opposite direction, right? And so Tony and I did not push Jade at all, and we were really interested to see what she would do. She's now going into her senior year at Lewis and Clark College in Portland, and she is majoring in environmental studies.
Oh, great.
And political science, and she's contemplating a career in environmental law. At this point, I think that's only one of many directions she might take, but the really cool thing, and the thing that in many respects I'm sort of happiest about or most proud of, is the fact that she still has this deep passion for nature. She still sends me photographs of cool natural things, sunsets or animals, and I do the same, and we have this connection, and it's part of who she is. So I think that that's wonderful.
Yeah, my daughter just sent me a text message and add the app, the Merlin app for the bird song.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, this is just, I love this thing.
If you haven't tried this out, I strongly recommend it. I knew about it, and I haven't really got into it actually until recently. You can be anywhere on the planet, and you can open up Merlin and press record, and in real time, Merlin will tell you what birds you're listening to. It will show pictures of that bird. You can touch the picture and find out any information you want about the bird. And it's one of the most powerful ways to literally get to know your neighbors. So they're not just these random beings out there. They have names, and they have habits, and chances are on a daily basis you're seeing the very same birds, and it's great to get to know them and feel like they're part of the neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, and you can like listen to record, but to have it just to hear something and then it say, oh, that's a song sparrow, or that's a crow. That is so helpful because it's so hard to disentangle it otherwise. So it's something that would be very hard to learn without it.
Yes. Totally agree. And the other app I will strongly recommend is iNaturalist.
Oh, yeah.
And iNaturalist is one, you literally download it to your phone. You can take a picture of any living thing on the planet, basically, plant, animal, fungi, and it will give you its best guess as to what that is. You can actually look at options, see what you think matches, press the match, and then there are scientists who will go and verify that observation or not and tell you, no, it's not that, but we think it's this. And then that data goes towards science and is often used in scientific publications. For example, climate change has impacted the time that birds arrive and depart each year, migrating birds. And it's observations at iNaturalist that have really allowed scientists to be able to document the shifts in seasons that have happened with climate change. So it's a way for you to participate directly in science.
Yeah, I love it. When I was in 5th grade, we went, it was the end of elementary school, and we went to Cape Cod on an overnight trip. And one of the naturalists there was a man named David Warren, who gave different talks. I've never seen him since. I've never seen anything written about him, but he was a really strong influence on my experience of nature. I wonder if you can talk about people you know who just are so close to the natural world and are effective at communicating what they know to other people.
Wow, there's lots of people who have dramatically shifted how I look at the world. Some have done that out in nature. People like John Young, who have helped me to understand the language that birds speak and what's going on with wild animals around you. Some of them are people that have inspired my understanding of nature intellectually. Thomas Berry is one for sure, and locally Brian Swim.
Right, he was just here doing the planetary mass in January.
He is wonderful, and so understanding that we are part of this unfolding universe story and that in a very, very real sense, we are the universe looking at itself, that has been a profound insight to me. Robin Wall Kimmerer, who's an indigenous woman who wrote a wonderful book called Braiding Sweetgrass, she straddles the worlds of indigenous science, indigenous traditional ecological knowledge on the one hand, and Western science on the other. She's a botanist, and she shows the connections between the two, and she gives insights into the worldview that indigenous peoples have had around the world for thousands of years. And of course, there's thousands of worldviews, but they have many things in common, which she pulls out. And people like her have really helped me understand the world differently as well.
Yeah, you've helped me understand the world differently. If you'd said it like 2 years ago, Malcolm, the most important book you read, or one of the most important books you read in the year 2024 is a book about dinosaurs, I would have been very surprised. But reading your Dinosaur Odyssey was really, really helpful to me. And I was telling Scott earlier that, I was so fascinated by these topics when I was a young person, but so much has changed in these fields. And it was so good to get a sense for how different they look. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just becoming a paleontologist. Like, what are the hard things, like becoming advanced in economics, linear algebra, and massive modeling was a difficult thing for me to learn. But what's a challenging thing for the paleontologists have to learn that's a difficult tool, that intellectual tool that they have to be able to grasp?
It's interesting because something like whatever you do for a long time doesn't seem so difficult anymore.
Yeah, exactly. But when you're first exposed
to it. And so I wanted to be a paleontologist from the time I was literally 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old. There was a brief period in my life where I could reliably spell the word paleontologist and not my last name. So this is something I aspired to do. But one of the interesting things about being a paleontologist, and it was something that I was driven towards, I had a passion for, so I don't think I found it, it wasn't a drag to do, it was exciting for me, but it was hard. and that is seeing the world in deep time. What do I mean by that?
Oh, yeah.
Most of us suffer from what I like to call severe temporal myopia.
Yeah.
We see the world in a span of about 100 years between our grandparents maybe and our grandkids at most. But we're missing the scope of what's going on. I mean, we go back to the universe story, to the origin of the universe, but even more recently in the places that we live, all around us, there's animals and plants that were here in the Ice Age when there were mammoths and mastodons and saber-toothed cats and giant ground sloths and camels and incredible animals right here, like walking right where we are today. And some of the animals that shared their world, like mountain lions, like crows and ravens, like vultures of various kinds. They were here then, and they're here now. And so just understanding that some of we've been time travelers with these species, and we're all adapting to the world as it changes, gives you a completely different perspective. And being a paleontologist is all about time traveling. It's all about trying to understand what the world was like then and what that tells you about your world today.
Yeah.
And just to give one example, and I don't think I even get to it in that book, but humanity evolves in kind of an ice house world with ice ages, a period of cold where there's ice caps at both poles. For most of Earth history, there were no ice caps. There were amazing ecosystems of trees and big animals at both poles. And evolution and ecology probably operated quite differently in that world. And so by understanding the world of dinosaurs, we can actually get a glimpse of the world that we are currently heading towards and learn lessons that can inform how we might act today. But those are hard concepts to get just because most of us are not trained to think in terms of deep time.
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions I had was, so many of our impressions of the Mesozoic era have changed since I was a child. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, like, many of us may not have studied this in many years. Like, what have we missed? What are the new things that have occurred in the last 30 or 40 years?
Well, the dinosaurs that I grew up with, that 4 and 5-year-old was passionate about,
had all different names. What happened? What's the deal with that?
Our understanding of them has been utterly transformed.
Yeah.
And it speaks to how science evolves. And science is not a set of facts. Science is a set of best estimations that are susceptible to dramatic change.
Yeah.
So for example, we thought that the Mesozoic was full of these giant, sluggish, cold-blooded, dull-looking animals that...
They were all gray.
May have been everywhere, but oh my God, it's like T-Rex wasn't something that you could walk away from, and it wasn't even a threat kind of thing. And what we have found is dinosaurs are more like birds than reptiles. They probably had metabolisms that were in between reptiles and birds, many of them, between reptiles and birds, and some of them had very bird-like metabolisms, but they're colorful, they're active, they engaged in complex behaviors, and their world was in an absolutely amazing and dynamic place. And in that understanding has happened during my lifetime. So I was fortunate to be in on the ground floor of this revolution and understanding. And in many senses, that revolution has just begun. That in the 1960s and 70s, even going into the 80s, we were kind of at the stamp collecting phase of paleontology. Here's a new animal from this country. It goes in the book in this place. These are its relatives. Now we're starting to understand their world, and it's causing us to rethink many things that we thought we knew about nature.
Yeah, and that was one of the most powerful parts of the book, too, is that it's moving from a perspective of studying individual distant dinosaurs to recognizing the whole ecosystem in which they lived. And I thought that was fascinating too, is just, to start to realize that, to take that ecological worldview and to begin to recognize its explanatory power in the time of the dinosaurs.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that gets me excited right now, is helping people to see the world not as a collection of, well, to quote Thomas Berry, not as a collection of objects, but a communion of subjects. And Mother Nature doesn't see the world in terms of blue whales and butterflies. Mother Nature sees relationships. She sees exchanges across boundaries, especially energy passing from sun to plants to herbivores to carnivores and through, detritivores all the way back to the earth. And that's how Mother Nature views the world. And not enough of us understand that flow, and we're part of that flow. And so every day, we either align with the way that flow works or we don't. And there's things that we can do to help align with that flow. And I think that ecological perspective is something that we desperately need right now.
Yeah, definitely. I visited you in your office, we talked, and I came away from there, and you're such a humble person, and I didn't have a sense for kind of what your contributions were. But there's somewhere in this book, where it says that this creature that's on the cover, that you have a special relation to this creature that's on the cover. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just your own contributions to science that aren't just about being a communicator, being a museum director, but are making these discoveries in the field.
Well, the picture that Malcolm is holding up is this animal. Some of you in the front could see it. The book is back there if you wanted to look at it later. But it is, people always ask me, because I'm a dinosaur paleontologist, what's your favorite dinosaur? And it is a close relative of this. So I spend a long time studying horned dinosaurs. I have named more new horned dinosaurs than anybody else. Yeah. I've studied how they, like Triceratops and its kin. And my favorite dinosaur is a beast I had the pleasure of naming, and I've named about 15 or 16 different dinosaurs. But it's called Cosmoceratops. I did not find the original one, but I had the pleasure of being the scientist to name it. And Cosmoceratops, well, Triceratops has 3 horns on its head, 1 on the nose and 1 over each eye. Cosmoceratops blows it away. It has 15 horns on its head. It's got 1 on the nose, 1 over each eye, 1 on each cheek, and 10 across the back of its big bony frill. And these animals had the biggest skulls of any land-living animals ever. They're up to 10 feet long. And so you have to ask the questions, why? And it's about sexual selection. Yes, it's about showing off and attracting mates. And many dinosaurs had these, but this particular group happened to fossilize them, because in fossils, all we get is bones. We don't get all those soft tissues, skin and flaps and color in that. And these things happen to fossilize these mating signals. So it allowed us to study and better understand why these animals look so bizarre and how they're related to animals today that are also using sexual selection, as it's been called, as opposed to natural selection, to evolve over time.
Yeah, and that was something I appreciated too. Just as a child, it was all about survival of the fittest. And now I'm an adult, I'm realizing it's survival of the sexiest.
There you go. There is some of that goes on.
So you mentioned earlier just about ways that studying dinosaurs might help save the Earth. What other ways do you see that happening? Knowledge that we're learning on the basis of from paleontologists about deep time. How is that helping scientists to understand what's happening to the climate as it changes so radically?
Well, just building on what I said earlier, if most of Earth history is a hothouse world, and that's how life evolved in those times, and we're moving towards that again, what can we learn? We can't understand hothouse worlds by looking around at animals today, we have to go back in time and study these ancient ecosystems. So I think dinosaurs are a window into that from a scientific perspective. But I think more important than that even, dinosaurs can be a window for us to expand our time horizons, to understand that we have been co-travelers with all of these animals. I mean, there have been 5 major extinction events in the history of life. We are now entering what many people would call the 6th extinction. What people forget is that everything alive today has an unbroken set of parents, let's just say of mothers, going back hundreds of millions of years. So you can go back to a few generations that you may know about for your family.
One generation.
But you could track that if you had the information. You could track that back to the origin of humans, to the origin of mammals, to the origin of land-living animals, and all the way back to fish. And there's an unbroken line of mothers. So in any generation, the odds of that mother coming together and giving birth to your ancestor was infinitesimally small for any given generation. But that happened millions of times to get you, to get each of us. And I think understanding that we're part of this incredibly improbable deep time flow is an astounding thing. And I think if we may talk about awe today, that was one of our topics that we said we might talk about. But I think feeling the awe that each one of us is an absolute and completely unlikely miracle is a wonderful thing to sort of internalize.
Yeah, Dr. Keltner was here doing his awe book, and we had a great conversation. But after I was thinking, our former dean, Alan Jones, just a wonderful person, but he really did emphasize, we're one human family, and I just think, wow, we're one family of creation, in the way that you just described. We're all cousins.
Yeah, and.
But I never realized that turkey vultures were here like thousands and hundreds of thousands of years ago, and I have a new appreciation from them just from this morning.
Well, and California condors, the reason the California condors were here and the reason they're so big is they evolved to feed on the carcasses of these giant mammals.
Right.
All those carcasses disappeared, and the condors managed to make a living feeding on whales and things like that were beached. But then we went and poisoned, we shoot deer with buckshot. The deer get away, the turkey vultures eat the deer and get lead poisoning and things like that. And so now there's an effort. They went all the way down to 12 or 13 individuals on the planet.
Yeah.
And they were pulled out of the wild and bred, and now they're being reintroduced. Just this past year, they were reintroduced to Yurok country in Northwest California.
Yeah, I'm so excited about that. I can't wait till I see my first California condor outside of Pinnacles in the wild. I can't wait for that day.
Tony and I saw one in Big Sur a year or so ago,
great.
and it was just like my heart beat still.
Oh, it's so great.
Yeah.
Are there any particular scientific discoveries that you hope will be made? I mean, in my field, they discovered the Nag Hammadi library, a bunch of clay pots that had these ancient manuscripts in them. Is there kind of a similar thing in paleontology that which you can imagine being discovered, but isn't in the record yet?
It's an interesting question, and the thing about science is, with the exception of certain areas of science like tiny particles, it's hard to predict where science will go.
Yeah, just the Nag Hammadi library would never have been
right. So you would not say, God, I wish somebody would discover this library.
In Egypt, yeah.
But I think the one that I would love to see, which I think will happen, I don't know if it'll happen in my lifetime, is the discovery of life on other worlds. And I think there's a reasonable chance that could happen on Mars. And I will not be surprised if it's a paleontologist that makes the discovery.
I love that.
Because there is no life on Mars that we know of today, and it's unlikely, given the atmosphere. But it's not improbable at all that there was once life on Mars, and it's now fossilized there. Yeah. And people may well go and find evidence, at least of simple life on Mars. And I think I would love to see that because there's so much hubris today around humanity. And if we understand that there's life on other worlds and we actually know it's there, I think that's going to have cause a fundamental shift in how we look at our place in the universe.
Yeah, that there were Martians once.
Yes, exactly.
So there's so many technology changes. What technology changes do you see kind of changing your world in terms of as a scientist?
I think staying on my theme of time, one of the things that I'm excited about is the use of AI and visualization technologies to give us glimpses of the world other than what we see today. So to give you an example, you go outside, you look around, and you think, this place has pretty much always looked like this, and it's pretty much always going to look like this. Most people feel that way. And it's completely untrue. It's like utterly incorrect that if you go back just 2 human lifetimes, this place was totally different. There was 10,000 grizzlies living in California 2 human lifetimes ago. And Thule elk and bighorn sheep, not just, resigned to these small places far away from humans, but all over the place. And I think visualizations can help us get there. So if you've ever put on this headgear to give you some of these visualizations, it's actually pretty powerful. And we're now talking with folks at Stanford and Silicon Valley about creating technologies that we can use at Cal Academy. So imagine, here's one thing we're thinking about. Where's my phone? Imagine being able to download an app onto your phone, and you can go and stand at the top of Nob Hill, and you can look at the way Nob Hill is today. You can open up the app, and the app will show you what that view looked like 200 years ago or 15,000 years ago, and you can go like this, and you'll be able to see that. Then you can press a button on the app, and it will say, well, here's some alternative futures for this place. Imagine if we rewilded San Francisco and we made it a place where it was a thriving place for humans and for non-human nature. What would it look like then? And we can show that to you. And I think those technologies and that science, so it's a combination of the two really, could transform our imaginations. Because in many respects right now, we're suffering from a crisis of imagination.
Yeah.
We can't even imagine a world that's much different from our world, even though we're living at the most chaotic, consequential moment in human history. And I think these technologies could help us.
I think that all the time. There's an old priest in the diocese, in his 90s. He and I would drive around the city. He grew up here and be like, yeah, I remember when they built this like apartment structure in the 30s. And yeah, it was. You're right. It's 2 lifetimes ago, and it was completely different.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a tradition of taking questions from the audience. So if anybody has any questions, we'd love to see them. I want to talk to you too, just about just kind of your work as a communicator and educator. How did you get involved in television, and then what did you learn? What surprised you as you were starting to do that kind of work?
Well, because I work on dinosaurs, people wanted to hear more about it because everybody's fascinated. Kids love dinosaurs. They're big, they're bizarre, and they're extinct, so they're kind of safe. And so I'd hosted a Discovery Channel series and done other things. And then I received a phone call one day from the Jim Henson Company, which is kind of an odd thing to get. And they said, hey, we're doing this kids show on PBS. And it's going to be all about dinosaurs, and we're calling it Dinosaur Train. And I said, you can't call it that. And she said, well, why not? And I said, listen, this isn't the Flintstones. You can't go putting humans and dinosaurs on trains and calling this okay for kids, right? And she said, no. We're only going to put dinosaurs on the train. stopped and I thought, oh my gosh, that's brilliant, right? Like trains and dinosaurs, if you're 5 years old, that's like chocolate and peanut butter.
Yeah,
It's like,
exactly.
doesn't get any better than that. So I said, all right, but if I'm gonna do this, you gotta let me say something about connecting kids with nature, because the last thing I wanna do is create one more piece of technology that's gonna addict kids to screens. And so Tony came up with the line that I use at the end of every episode, which is get outside, get into nature, and make your own discoveries. And so that's what I did. We did over 100 episodes of Dinosaur Train. It was airing daily in 80 countries around the world. It's still airing. And I never thought that I would have that kind of an impact in the world. And so that, being involved in media, has taught me some really important lessons about how to reach broad audiences. But now at the Cal Academy, I serve as executive director at the California Academy of Sciences, and we're trying to rethink museums for the 21st century. And so
I'm so interested in that. I think of the Museum of Science in Boston and just what an effect it had on me as a child. I can shut my eyes and still see the dioramas that they had from my childhood. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about like how museums have changed too, from like what the Museum of Science was like when I was 7 to what we see at the Cal Academy now. It seems like such a magical place. Every time I walk in there, it's like entering this world more deeply, but a new world also.
Yeah, and the Museum of Science in Boston is a wonderful place. I know the executive director, and they're doing remarkable things. I think that what's changing right now is the way that museums and science centers operate and what they're trying to do. So forever, we have done two things for the most part. We've done science, whatever kind of science we do, and we have researchers at the Academy, and we've done science education for broader audiences. Now, what we're seeing more and more, and it's certainly true of the California Academy of Sciences, is that we are embracing a third sphere that we've never embraced in a serious way before. And that third sphere, to go with science and learning, is collaboration. Yeah. It's community engagement. It's saying, we don't have all the answers. It's not going to be a one-way flow of information. In fact, the biggest questions we have today, no one person has the answers to. We need to crowdsource the future to an extent. And so what we're going to do is create spaces for convocation, for collaboration, for gathering, where people can come and better understand the world that we want to grow into, so that we can target that world and get a sense of what that would look like. And so that's what we're working on at the California Academy of Sciences, is really thinking about being future-focused and imagining all the pieces that have to fit together to create a system that's thriving for people and for non-human nature. And it turns out you can't have healthy people without healthy nature, and vice versa. So we have to solve for both.
Yeah, I definitely want to be part of that collaboration. As you were describing the three goals, I was thinking that the third goal was going to have something to do with advocacy for the sake of the planet. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that. Like, are there sticky situations that you get into just in having that be part of your mission?
Yes, and advocacy is one of the key values of the Academy.
Yeah.
For a long time, basically for the history of museums, we've tried to maintain neutrality, which in retrospect, we never had.
Yeah.
And so now I think we need to embrace purpose. And I would say the thing that I'm most proud of with the California Academy of Sciences is that we have done that. We have said, we're not gonna just be a place that does science and education. We're gonna stand for something. And we need to stand for what we decided on was regenerating the natural world. And for us, humans are part of the natural world. So this means regenerating places where humans and nature can both thrive. And that's why we exist. And what we're trying to do now is create assets that anybody can benefit from that will help them live into their values and do good for the world along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. When I came away from our last time when I was meeting in your office, that was the strongest sense I had was you were talking about just formulating the new mission statement and what it took to kind of begin to redirect our energies in that way. The Cal Academy is one of the oldest institutions in San Francisco. It's from 1853. Grace Cathedral is from 1849. We were both born at the same time. I look around at Grace Cathedral, I feel like we grew up with the city. A lot of the quirkiness that you see in the city, the values that the city has, I recognize as part of our DNA. I wonder if you can talk a little bit the history of Cal Academy, like how did it come into being and how has that history shaped your uniqueness?
It was 7 guys sitting in a darkened room, probably smoking cigars, downtown San Francisco, and they were all naturalists of some kind. Some were doctors by profession, but they came together and said, there's a lot of unique plant and animal life in this place that we have come to, and some of it is disappearing, and we need to create a society, a museum that's going to document this. And that's when the California Academy of Sciences was born. So literally 3 years after California became a state. The museum was downtown. It burned to the ground in the 1906 earthquake and fire. There's a wonderful woman botanist who worked at the Academy at the time and went into the building next day after it was burnt down and climbed the burned out staircases and managed to salvage some of the type specimens, the original specimens ascribed to particular new species. And they still exist in the museum. The vast majority of the collections were destroyed in the fire. But as it happened, there was an expedition of the Academy in a ship called the Academy that were in the Galapagos. And they were conducting a year-long collection tour in the Galapagos, and they came home with tens of thousands of specimens from the Galapagos, which formed the seed of the new Academy collection. And today, it's an astounding collection of tens of millions of objects, one of the biggest natural history collections in the world. So the institution does have a deep history here. California is a biodiversity hotspot, which means that there is an abundance of unique and threatened life in this state. And the Academy, in many respects, is dedicated towards that living world and the future of it, and that's one of the things we're really working on hard now.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about Reimagine San Francisco. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. We thought if we're the California Academy of Sciences, it would be crazy for us not to focus in California. It would be equally crazy not to focus right here in San Francisco. Most people don't think about it, but cities are ecosystems. They are, in fact, the fastest growing ecosystems anywhere in the world. Right now, they take up about 4% of Earth's ice-free land area. By 2050, it'll be about 10% of that land area. And we need to rethink cities for the future, because right now, cities are not places that are typically nature-friendly. In fact, we think about cities as places where the wild things aren't.
Yeah.
But we need to invite nature in, and I'm not talking about bringing grizzlies into the city, but I am talking about bringing back native plants, because native plants that evolved to be here over thousands of years, attract native insects. Because native insects often will not eat exotic, non-native plants, but they evolve to eat native plants, because plants don't want to be eaten. They fight back, and they create chemicals. But if the insects evolved with the plants, they evolved to consume those chemicals. So native plants attract native insects. Native insects are the base of the food chain for many amphibians, reptiles, rodents, and certainly the vast majority, like 96% of birds. And so once those native insects come back, all these other animals come back. And now you've got a thriving ecosystem that's good for nature, but it's equally important for people. It turns out that the greater the biodiversity, the healthier our immune systems. The greater the biodiversity, the better we deal with anxiety and depression and attention deficit disorder. And then there's like type 2 diabetes and all these things which improve if we spend time out in wild or semi-wild nature. So inviting nature back to the city is important. So we started reimagining San Francisco. We catalyzed this collaboration. There's now 41 organizations in San Francisco, the Presidio Trust and the Parks Conservancy and Trust for Public Land and smaller groups, Exploratorium, who are coming together to reimagine the city for the future, and not so that we can come up with the answer, but we can start to host the conversation, and we can start to make interventions that allow everybody to get access to nature and allow places for nature to recover within the city boundaries. So this is part of the vision we're working on, and it's really exciting. Just to give 2 examples that we're working on. One is rewilding schoolyards, adding more wild nature in schoolyards and having those schoolyards become the place, the classroom, where kids learn not just science, but history and geography and all these different things. And another place we're working is Bayview Hunters Point. And there's a wonderful new park going in called India Basin. And that's, a low-income neighborhood that has been hammered in the past. And now we're looking at making it a wonderful place where nature has returned, and we're giving back to that community by making the environment healthy, whereas for so long it's been desperately unhealthy. But we're doing this in collaboration with the community, and we're really excited about where that can go in the future.
Yeah, our mission statement is reimagining church with courage, joy, and wonder. So we're in the reimagining business too. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the Presidio Trust and just, I've been working so hard. I had like a 45 minutes, so I just went for a walk late at night, like around sunset. There's the eucalyptus trees that are just being choked out by the vines that are growing up them. I mean, I just wonder how you're working with them in terms of reimagining San Francisco.
Presidio Trust is kind of a magical place that most people don't fully grasp. And in particular, the work that's been done there now by the Presidio Trust and the Parks Conservancy for decades. And so people don't realize that half of San Francisco used to be sand dunes. That was true of a huge part of the Presidio Trust. They have been working to bring back dune habitat by planting some of those native plants that evolved to live on dunes. Just a couple of months ago, I had the great pleasure and honor of releasing a butterfly called the silvery blue into the Presidio Trust. And there was a butterfly, the Presidio, called the Xerces blue, and that went extinct shortly after World War II. And that butterfly played an important ecological role. It was a pollinator, it was food for a lot of animals, and it's been gone. So we've been looking, the Academy scientists have been working with others to identify a surrogate butterfly that could be released in the Presidio that could help to fill that role that the Xerces blue played. And we found a relative, a close relative, that is adapted to live on sand dunes from down near Monterey, and it's called the silvery blue. And so I had the pleasure of being involved in rewilding with the silvery blue, and the Presidio is an example of how we might look at San Francisco in the long run. So imagine if the whole city
like that,
could, by 2100, could look more like the Presidio with abundant nature and beautiful places for people to live as well. Yeah. So I think there's some great inspiration there.
Yeah, I love that. I think I remember when it was still an Army base, and it's such a wonderful change in San Francisco.
Yeah,
in such a recent time. Let me get to the questions, though. I would hate it if I talked too much and we didn't hear these questions. Basically, how do you know? You mentioned many recent past 20-plus year discoveries and hope for future discoveries. How will you know you've achieved them? AI, what else?
That's a really interesting question. We're never going to know if we've achieved what we set out for in science, because science doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
There's so much serendipity in science. where you're studying one thing and it gives you insights into something else. I mean, I was digging up dinosaurs on the island of Madagascar that ended up helping us understand how the continents split apart from Pangea to the continents we know today. We weren't looking for that.
That was one of my favorite parts of the book, by the way. I loved that part.
It just happened, right? And that's the serendipity of science. But I think in terms of how will we know if we have done what we need to do, we will know if humanity has realigned itself with the natural world, which we've been around for 300,000 years. And it's not like indigenous peoples were always perfect and never did anything wrong to the environment. In fact, they helped to drive a major extinction at the end of the Ice Age. Wherever we went, we killed the big things first. But then these indigenous cultures learned that they had to move into balance with the places that they lived if they wanted to persist in the long run. And this is a lesson that was learned in Australia and North America and the high Arctic, all over. And we need to relearn some of those lessons with science and the help of both Western science and indigenous science. And we will know we're successful when things turn around and Earth every year is not degenerating in ecological health, but regenerating. We will know when we've turned that corner that we've been successful, because it's going to take a lot of science to get there, but it's going to take a lot of shift in how we think about the world as well.
Yeah. The next question is, what gives you hope for humans' evolution in the face of climate change?
So one of the things I worry about most right now is the notion of hope. There was a study done several years ago, a global study of youth aged 18 to 30. One of the surprising findings from that study is that the vast majority of those youth put climate and the environment as their number one concern. It's like 87%. That's the good news. We don't need to convince anybody that this is a topic worth pursuing. The scary news that came out of that study is that over half of those youth, about 56%, think that we're doomed, think that it's already too late. They have lost hope. And that is not a true statement, at least that it's too late. Scientifically, there's still time to turn this around and start moving on to that regenerative path. But the danger is, if enough people believe it's too late, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So what we need to do desperately is help to engender hope. That's why the Academy is focused on this idea of regenerating the natural world, of sharing positive stories, about giving people positive pathways to make a difference, because we need people all over the world doing this, and they need to have hope or they won't engage in those activities. So hope is such a slippery word. And some people don't like it because they think it's too much like optimism. And it's like, I'm just going to sit back here and hope that things go okay, right? Yeah. And that's not what we're talking about. I'm talking about hope the way educator David Orr talks about it. Hope as a verb with its sleeves rolled up. Hope as a form of activism. And we need to feel that hope and feel motivated, inspired to act. And that's where we need to go now.
Yeah, it's interesting this week. Jürgen Moltmann died. He was a prisoner of war. He was a German soldier during World War II, prisoner of war by the Allies, where he learned theology. And his most important contribution was a book called The Theology of Hope. And that was exactly the situation. Coming out of, he was in prison camps, and the German officers and soldiers there just had no idea what was going on in Germany, what horrible things had been done in the name of their nation. And how do you rebuild the world after Auschwitz? And that was his basic contribution. So it was part of the 50s, 60s kind of move, but that reflection on what hope is, what does it mean theologically, philosophically, how does it function, et cetera, is definitely part of our conversation that we have here.
And I'm excited that is part of what you do. And I love the fact that wonder is a big part of what you do here as well. And wonder is another one of those emotions that's so important. And as Dr. Kaltner talks about, it's this sense, well, it's like the story I told at the beginning, that sense of awe and vastness and the sense of connection with the world. If the world consists of resources, it's dead, it's inert.
Yeah, I
There's
agree.
not much sacred in that.
Yeah.
But if the world is relatives, if everything around you is a relative of yours, well, now everything is sacred. And anything can give you that sense of awe if you pay attention to it. And awe is this emotion that we need a revolution in. And Dr. and I are co-conspirators in thinking about how we might bring that to scale. And so I invite you to think about doing things that he advocates for, like going for awe walks, where you just walk outside and open up, stop thinking about the day-to-day stuff that's occupies your mind most of the time, and just open yourself up to what's there. And think about how this place came to be and the fact that you're here at this moment to enjoy it. And take notice of things that inspire awe in you, because we need that emotion desperately right now.
Yeah.
So I love the fact that wonder is one of the things.
Yeah, and what you're describing is just the way I pray, you know? So when I went out last night, that's exactly what I was doing as I walked through the woods in the Presidio. You know, so many institutions have been changed by COVID. I wonder how things are different at Cal Academy. If you have any observations about it, maybe it's just the same way it was in 2018.
I think all of us were changed by COVID, whether we think we were or not. If you run an organization whose business model depends on people coming through your front door and then you lock the front door for an extended period, you are going to struggle. And we had a really, really tough time. And that tough time, to some extent, is continuing. We were running a structural deficit coming out of COVID, and we had to do some budget cuts this year, which still amount to less than 5% of the total staff. But these are some of the most painful decisions that you ever make as a leader. And so our whole organization now is looking at how we cope with this moment and how we think about moving into the future that's a thriving future and living up to the promise that I think the Academy can reach.
I'm almost in like the bonus round. We have like so little time left, but I couldn't like stop. And so I heard you talk a little bit more about the oceans. So, you know, the California kelp forests were being decimated by the sea urchins. I wonder just how are things going in the ocean these days?
So you may or may not know that kelp forests are this phenomenal ecosystem, not just on the west coast of North America, but in many coasts around the world. And they're incredible ecosystems because they concentrate many species. A huge number of even open ocean species spend a portion of their lives in kelp forests. And what happened in the west coast of North America is that beginning in about 2013, there was a big warming event. And then almost in conjunction with that, a new disease showed up called sea star wasting disease. And the sea stars literally started to melt away and die. Absolutely horrible. And the sea stars are major predators of sea urchins, in particular purple sea urchins. So you take away the predator and the prey just goes, all right, let's go. And they come out of their little crevices and they're everywhere. And those sea urchins eat kelp. So before, the sea stars, together with things like sea otters, kept the urchins in check. Once they were removed, the urchins went crazy and ate all the kelp and destroyed the kelp ecosystem. And so all those organisms that depended on the kelp are really struggling right now. So what we're doing is raising sea stars, looking at the genetics of sea stars to see if we can make them more resilient to things like this wasting disease. And we're hoping to get approval from the government to release sea stars back into the wild so that they can start preying on these sea urchins and we can bring the ecosystem back into a healthier balance. And that is really exciting to me. This is what regeneration is all about. It's not about stewarding nature, which is, again, putting humans on top. It's about partnering with nature to bring these ecosystems back. But they need some help right now because of our actions. So that's what we're trying to do, and I'm really excited about those steps.
That change in language that you talk about is so important. So I mean, it's just, we're not here to just to be sustainable. We're not here just to be stewards, but we're part of this in a much deeper way. I really appreciate that.
And I'll just add that the word sustainable is one that I struggle with, because sustainability is all about kind of holding on to what's left.
Right.
We've hammered things, but we're going to hold on to what's left, and we're going to be sustainable. Well, what we're seeing is you can conserve places or try and be sustainable, and you're still going to get climate warming and all kinds of havoc. What we need to do is not aim for sustainability, but regeneration.
Yeah.
We need to aim to work with these systems to bring them back so that they can be resilient in the face of the changes that we know are coming.
Yeah, totally. Genao is the Greek word for to beget. It's the root word for regenerating.
Say that again?
Genao.
Oh, I'm going to have to look that up.
Yeah, definitely. Gena Omicron. Oh my gosh, I can't believe how the time's gone by so fast, but this has just been my dream. I really appreciate you saying yes and being here early in the morning. We have a few announcements. The service goes on at 11 o'clock upstairs. You can make gifts to Grace Cathedral. You can do that by texting the word THINK, T-H-I-N-K, to the number 76278, THINK, to 76278. And Scott, we're so grateful to be part of your colleagues and your partners in the city, and looking forward to seeing what we can do to reimagine San Francisco.
Well, Malcolm, thank you, and thanks for everything you do. I am a big believer in the power of religion at this moment as well, especially in bringing back the sacred and helping people recognize the roles that they can play in the world. So thank you for engendering wonder. We need a lot more of it.
Yeah, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was great, Scott.
Thank you all.